You're listening to Leadership Loading, a podcast that inspires leaders to be continuous learners and provides insight for those making the leap from the front line to the boardroom. My name is Jason McLaren, and I'm an Air Force firefighter veteran and safety expert turned entrepreneur and nonprofit director. I'm sitting down with industry leaders to talk about their leadership traits and lessons they have learned that can make an impact on future leaders. Hey everybody, my name is Jason McLaren. I'm the host of Leadership Loading Podcast, and my guest today is Mads Singers. He's been a management coach and worked with companies like Coca-Cola and Shell, and I like that his big thing is walking the walk. That's why I invited him on today and wanted him to talk a little bit about our part 2 of our 8-part series on resilient leadership, and that is learn continuously. I think some of his things that he does are able to let us be better leaders, and so I'll just get into it with him. Mads, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much, Jason. Awesome to be here.
So the whole thing of this is like, leadership coaching is not just for the C-level suite, right? It's for frontline managers, those coming into those positions, and it helps build those leadership skills. So with that, what makes someone a continuous learner and able to become that better leader?
Yeah, I mean, I'll share a little bit of my own story. I mean, when I started working corporate, right, like I actually had total different direction. Like I used to be even more nerdy than I am now, and I was sort of looking going the IT route and so on. I was lucky enough to get an absolutely brilliant manager in sort of my first job, and she really inspired me to go that way. And it didn't say it in words, but she just inspired me by her actions and what she was achieving and how she made people feel and all that sort of good stuff, right? And to put it politely, I was not a fan of school at the time. I'd started like a 5-year education on some IT data mechanic stuff. After a couple of years, I was kind of fed up, and I was like, screw that. I'm from Denmark, so basically when I turned 18, I started looking for a job, and I was like, screw this. The last 3 years of school, I'll just leave it, and I'll start working instead. I did that, and then I realized like management, that's where I want to go. Now, what happened was everyone told me, well, if you want to get into management, there's this 5-year management degree you should go do. And I was like, there's no chance that I'm going to spend anywhere near 5 years sitting in a school bench somewhere again. That's not going to happen. So I started with probably for most people crazy amounts of personal development. So in the company I was in, we had a sort of a soft skills learning platform, basically where we had these courses that were anywhere between an hour and 16 hours or something like that. But that could be like how to do an effective meeting, how to do all these different things, right?
Yeah.
And basically, at the time, I knew I wanted to do management, and I knew I didn't want to go to school. So the two things I was looking at was like, how can I learn and how can I get to do this thing? So basically, I ended up being very good friends with the girl who was running learning and education. She said in the company prior to me being there, the maximum courses anyone had ever completed was 8, and I did 260 over the course of a year and a half or 2 years or something.
Right.
So basically, I went everywhere and did everything I could. Right. I took up all the knowledge I could find. Pretty quickly, like I ended up actually like walking around to other managers, getting to know other managers, and kind of say, every day when I finish my shift, or like once in a while, can I come and take an hour, sit next to you and see what you do, right? So I'd go around, meet different managers, look at what they're doing, how they're doing it, talk with them, build relationship, trying to learn from them, right? And I was all the time I was like, how did you get there? What did you do? How did you end up here? What was your steps? What was your route? How did you get here? And I was basically trying to get resources, right? So some people recommended books, some people recommended me courses. I ended up going to a bunch of courses and trainings myself, paying out of my own pocket. And basically for about 10 to 12 years or so, I usually ended up reading a book a week. I went through a huge amount of material, but really self-learning, right? And I went into management in between that, but my primary reason for me getting in there was really the development and the self-learning that I had gone through to that stage, right?
Right.
And I think I know when a lot of people start out with this, it's always the question of where do I start, right? The problem is when you are where you are, it's easy to say, well, it's easy, you just go and do this thing. But I can still remember like 18 years ago or something when I was sitting looking at this for the first time, and I'm like, what do I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like I'm an entrepreneur now, I run multiple businesses, and I can see people in the same situation. You know, they're like, I want to run a business, what do I do? And the problem is for people in it, it seems so easy, like it seems so logical, but when you don't know the resources, you know, it's difficult. And podcast was also a great avenue for me, and that's why I love podcasting a lot as well, to help people.
Yeah, definitely. Those are the classes you took at the company you were with. Were those like an internal software or an external software they use?
No, it was. I think it was called Skillsoft. I think it's a pretty
Okay.
common one. So it's used in multiple places. But I mean, honestly, it wasn't impressive at all. But when you're 18 and know nothing, it was better than nothing, right?
Right.
If I knowing what I know now, I probably wouldn't have spent very much time on that software specifically. But again, you have to start somewhere, right? And
Yeah.
I very quickly figured out that it was much more about consistency, right? So basically I spend about 2 hours a day on self-development, generally, including Saturday and Sunday, right? And
Right.
that was, I mean, when you're 18, it seems retarded, and I don't think most 18-year-olds would do that. But again, we're all different, so
Yeah. Always
yeah.
always looking for those outlets. I think I've seen similar softwares where it's someone in the company has just uploaded a bunch of PowerPoint slides with some voiceovers, and then that's the training you have to do. But like you
Yeah,
said, it's
no,
better than nothing.
it wasn't like that. Like it was decent training from that point of view, and I think Skillsoft was. I mean, they provided to many large corporations, right? So it was decent content, but yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So as leaders, either being over a company or a leader in an existing company, how do we promote that within our culture and make sure that our team wants to be on that continuous learning curve?
Yeah. So again, running a bunch of big businesses and working with a lot of staff, the key thing is working with your staff on it, right? So one of the things I always say is school sucks because in school you don't learn how to learn. And if you want to be successful in life in anything, the one skill you have to learn is learning how to learn, right? And when like my staff, like I usually have a weekly one-to-one with everyone that works for me, like everyone that works directly for me, right? Not everyone in the company. And I basically expect them to have the same down the way. And basically what I do is literally on a weekly basis, I'm talking with people on the development, about the development, right? And I'm, yeah, wanting to make sure they progress, learn new skills, you know, build the relationship with them and so on. And a good way, I mean, the best way to do it, most people, when they first start out, they don't know what to do. And the best thing to teach people how to learn, and sometimes you're lucky to find people who have already got it, but most business owners won't be in that situation, right? But when you're working with someone brand new and or someone, you know, who haven't got that experience, you just want to start really slow. So I basically walk through a scenario where I'm sort of either looking at two aspects. One is, are they performing in the current job?
Right.
And if and basically if they are not, then the focus of any personal development is going to be how are we going to get you from where you are to performance. If they are already doing really well in their current job, we might talk at what do you want to do in the future, for example, like leadership, management, or a different direction within a business, or total different direction at all, right? um, in either scenario, basically I sit down with them, we talk about like what you want to learn, what makes sense to learn, and then we then identify what's the potential learning resources, right? And you only need to go to people one time with this, but basically I try and brainstorm, because most people don't think about it, but I try and brainstorm what's the ways we can learn. So you can read books, you can do courses, you can webinars, you can spend time on YouTube, you can there's a variety. Like you can have a trainer, you can have a mentor, you can pay for someone to teach you. You can go to a classroom training, like basically list out all these different type of ways, right? And then I usually ask people like, what's their preferred ways personally to do this? And then usually pick one or two ways, right? So as just to take an example, people say, I love reading books. Say, great. Let's say for argument's sake, you want to develop your management skills, just because that's the topic. And I'll then say, well, okay, that's great. So any particular areas you want to start with? You love reading, any particular areas? And if there is, or if there isn't, I'll basically give them the same job, which is for next week conversation, you go away and you go and find two good resources that you think will match what you want to learn, right?
Yeah.
Come back the week after. They say, here's the two resources. This book is great because blah. This book is great because X, Y, Z. And we go through it again and we say, okay, great. For next week, buy this book. Come back next week, they buy the book and like, great, now we have the book. For next time, read 2 chapters. Now, what you'll notice what I'm doing here is I'm going through this very, very slowly.
Right.
Where most people go wrong is like, oh, personal development, go read this book for next week, right? The problem is when you do that, you set people up to fail. Whereas my focus is the total opposite. I want it for the first fair period of time. I want to set them goals that are easily achievable so they feel success, so they feel that they're achieving their goal. And basically what happened, they come back the week after, I'll say, okay, you read the first 2 chapters. How was it? Do you feel they're useful? Did you learn something? Do you feel, based on the first 2 chapters, do you feel this book might help you learn some of the stuff you want to learn, right? Or like, is it totally wrong? So the reason why I always identify 2 resources in the beginning is because sometimes, they start reading a book and they're like, no, this is totally in the wrong direction. So instead of having to redo the whole research, basically identifying 2 resources, it means if the first one is totally off guard, you can basically pick the other one and get moving quickly, right? But basically go through it slowly. Now, what happens when you do that over time, it happens in one or 2 ways, but generally what happens is that, you give people a couple of chapters all the time. And, for some people it's a month, some people it's 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. But at some point, you give them a couple of chapters for the week after and they come back and they're like, yeah, I read the whole book. It was so good.
Yeah.
Right. I love this thing. And you kind of see this curve where you just see like suddenly, they get it. Right. And the thing is this, like the second they get personal development, that's when you have someone who starts to understand how to learn. Now, the great thing is you can still help them be accountable, right? You can still help them keep developing because, so even as someone into personal development, like my personal development nowadays goes up and down, right? The benefit you have by being with them on a weekly basis is you're an accountability partner, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like you actually push them to keep going on a weekly basis because they know I got to talk to Bossman every week, right? I want to have something to talk to them about, right? So, and I've found that to be a really, really good method. Again, it's not about speed. Like, don't make it about. So, a couple of key things with this method. Number one is they always make the choice. Where most business owners, where most leaders go wrong is they tell people what to do. They tell people what to read. They tell people what courses to do, right? Don't do that, right?
Right.
Because if you do that, you take the responsibility of the learning out of the individual's hands and put it into yours. Now, if you tell them what to read and they don't feel they learn what they need to learn or they don't do what they need to do, that's your fault because you picked the wrong resource, right? The whole point of this exercise is make sure that they learn how to do this themselves. They learn how to do the research. They learn how to make the pick, right? Your job is not to tell them what to read. Even if they pick the wrong book, if they pick a book won't solve the issue, that is a learning curve. So that is like by far, this is where most people make the mistake.
Yeah, and I've got 2 follow-ups on that. So, like you said, a lot of people make the mistake of trying to shove something down an employee's throat and say, well, this is better for the company. And you've kind of identified how that works in the workplace or engage in continuous learning in the workplace, and I think that's a great tool that you use there. Do you think that, well, first question is, do you think implementing those little feedbacks and little tidbits throughout the training incentivizes people to want to do more? Because then they can kind of go to their coworkers and be like, oh, I just did this and I did that. Or do you think either way?
Yeah, I mean, initially, again, for me, it's not about the speed. Right. I mean, honestly, when it comes to personal development, it's not about the speed. It's getting people to the stage where they start to understand the value of personal development. Right.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, as soon as they do it, as soon as they get it, their value to your business like 10x instantly. Right. Because someone, like, if you throw a project at someone and they'll just go figure it out, like that versus someone saying, okay, boss, I don't know what to do. Tell me what to do. Like the difference between those two is worlds apart, right? And when you have a human being that knows how to go figure stuff out, like the value of that human being to your organization is just, it's fundamentally different, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so on that end, do you think it increases employee engagement with someone actually learning what they want to learn rather than learning just what's next on their agenda?
So again, like as I said, if people are not performing, my key focus is always getting them performing. There's no point in teaching people stuff about something else if they're not performing in their current job.
Yeah.
Right. And that's as much a leadership signal, because if people are not performing, you want to send them the signal that they need to start performing. And you want to send them the signal, I'm here to help you. I will help you as much as I can. But your job as an employee is to make sure you perform on a regular basis in the job that you have taken.
Definitely. All right. So what is one step that a leader needs to take to become a continuous learner? What do you think the first thing they need to do?
Just like pick up a resource every so often, right? And the time frame is less important, right? It's not a quantity thing. Like again, like I've been there, I've read a lot of books, I've gone through a lot of courses, I've listened to a lot of podcasts. Generally, it's not a volume thing. The key thing for me, build, like just like exercise, right? Going to the gym. Like it's not like if you go to the gym, 12 hours a day for 3 days, that's not going to save your life, right?
Right.
So personal development is the same. Build a healthy habit, right? Like, have a weekly habit of, listen to one podcast, read one book a month, or like build some habits that works for you, whatever that is, but make sure they work for you, right? And most business owners, it's like, oh, I'm busy, managers, I'm busy, I can't do that. I'll tell you, like Barack Obama, when he was in office, spent at least an hour a day on personal development, right? If the president of the United States can do that, everyone have the freaking time, right?
Yeah.
Now, you might not prioritize it like that. You might think you're busy working, but you're doing the wrong thing if that's the case.
Definitely. And I do the same thing. I have a fairly long commute into the town because we live in the country, and I use that. That's my development time. It's an hour each way. So, either a podcast or listen to the audio on a YouTube or something. Like you said, it's always about continuous development and making sure you're using. I mean, there's free resources, but there's also those paid ones out there. You said earlier, learning sucks, and or not learning, that people say learning sucks. And what do you think about, you said you weren't going to do a 5-year degree and that sort of thing. What about if someone's looking at a job where they need a degree, like, it's in the job description, you have to have a, whatever.
Right. If you want to be a doctor, I mean, go for it. Right.
Yeah.
I put my hand up. I prefer being operated on by doctors who actually know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Also saying I'll never be one. But yeah, I mean, again, it's the same thing, right? Like personally, if I was looking at it, I would start early. So personally, like I'll start with some self-development by reading some of the curriculum, getting to understand like some of the concepts. One of the fundamental problems with school is that people read what's in the books, but they don't understand the concepts. Like you
Right.
might read something, you might be able to repeat it, but if you don't understand how it works, it's useless, right? And I mean, I spend a lot of time here in Asia, and like it's really so sad seeing like literally most kids here spend 20, 12, 14 hours in school every day, and it's just repetitive learning. All right, it's not
Right.
understanding, it's repetitive learning, and it's such a shame because it's a waste of time. Like they spend probably they would learn more in a third of the time if they would actually get to understand what the hell they were doing, right?
Mm.
And it's the same thing with school. Again, I don't think school is particularly effective. However, it have its course, right? And like I'm a very self-motivated individual, but people who feel they're lazy and things like that can benefit a little bit from school because they do get a little kick in the ass once in a while, right? But fundamentally, for me personally, my problem is I hate the fact that you do 1 hour English, 1 hour French, 1 hour math, and it's all segregated. Like
Yeah.
if I want to learn French, I sit down and I do French for 3 months, and then I freaking get it, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't want to do like a tiny bit here, a tiny bit there, and like next week you already forgot previous week and all that sort of stuff, right? So for me, it's about like putting it into big chunks. So if I was going to school to learn any kind of degree, like how I would go around it would totally be trying to prep a bit up front, and even if I went to school, like what I would do is I'd figure out the subjects that I was going to. I'll figure out the subjects that I like the most, and I would go absolutely all in on those. Right? I would go head over heels. I would go way above what you can. Now, most people look at grades and they try and balance the averages, but um, one thing that I know 100% sure is the success in life is about your strength, right? If you're anything, you get hired because you're really, really good at something, not because you don't suck at anything, right? And I think I would take the same approach from a degree perspective. Like I would really figure out, being a doctor, like what am I absolutely freaking good at being a doctor, right? And what are the things I really want to work with, and what's the stuff I don't want to do, right?
Yeah. Definitely. So I did the same thing. I'm a continuous learner all through my military career. I was taking whatever classes I could get. Um, then I got to that point where I needed a degree, and so I went slow on my bachelor's because I didn't know what I was doing. Like you said, it's kind of repetitive and all that. Once I got the hang of it, I was able to, just I'd take several, 5, 6, 7 classes at a time just to knock it out. Because, like you said, if I'm going to do it, I'm just going to get into it, be done with that, and be done. So I agree with that mindset there. So, all right. So you have some resources that your company does. Can you tell me about your management academy?
Yeah. So I mean, actually my fundamental biggest problem with management training in companies today is the fact that in most businesses, what happens is that it's kind of like they poach an employee and they're like, oh, you're promoted, right? The employee go home Friday night as an employee, they show up Monday morning and now they're manager.
Right.
What changed over the weekend? Absolutely nothing, right? And the problem is because most companies don't have a good sort of follow-up system with people. They don't develop them prior to these management situations. So what happens in most businesses is that unfortunately um, managers are lost, right? Because one is the sort of the Peter principle. They get promoted to to their degree of incompetence, and it's not because they can't be good at it. But the thing is, when you put someone in a role that they don't have the skill set for, they don't have the knowledge for, and you don't give them support, the chance of them doing a really good job is really, really low, right? So really what I focus on is really making sure in businesses, both the owner, the leader in smaller businesses, and also the managers within the organization get a solid management training, right? So basically my effective management academy, I sort of call it the 80-20 of effective management, but the focus is really, closely packed a mix of specific processes, a specific management process that you want to execute consistently, and then a mix of how to go around a lot of the mindsets, right? and understand a lot of behavior. So basically understand why people do what they do, understand why different people are different. But fundamentally really a good mix of, getting into the right mindsets. And just as an example, probably the biggest difference between being an individual contributor and being in a management role is that the second you're a manager, nothing you do matters. And the problem is most people who are promoted is people who are amazing individuals. They perform really highly as an individual, and they're always so used to it being about their performance. However, when they move into a management role, they can do the best they possibly could, but if the team is not delivering the right results, it doesn't matter. And that mindset moving from it's all about me till I don't matter, to a large extent, is a very difficult mindset change to make, right? So I spent quite a bit of time going through that and how that works and so on, because as an individual who've gone through the travel a couple of times, it's really, really essential to become a good manager, to really understand, to let that go, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with the, basically servant leadership, building your team up and making them perform better. And then you're going to, your whole department or organization is going to perform better. So, all right. Well, Mads, anything else for the guests? How can we get a hold of you if we need to?
Yep. My website, madssingers.com, MADSSINGERS.com. I also have a management podcast. I have a bunch of interesting materials, and again, I'm on all the social medias as well. You can write me on the website, but you're also welcome to connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, anything. And you might get to talk to me, or more likely one of my employees. So
there you go. All right. Thanks for coming on, Mads, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Jason.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Loading Podcast. You can support this podcast on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/leadershiploading to get access to exclusive content, chats, and a whole lot more. Again, that's patreon.com/leadershiploading, or visit our website, leadershiploading.com, for more options.